conversation. It's the conversation. Y'all ready? Let's go. No filter, no restrictions. You about to get my opinion in its purest form. So my words, don't try to spin them. What I said is what I said. And what I said, I meant it. The gloves are off now when I'm coming out swinging. So engage in verbal combat, but you better be ready. Cause this here for me is light work, even if the topic's heavy. I'm ready for it all with no running from nothing. You just take the time to digest what I put in. No rushing, but time is moving, don't waste it. You want the real, come and face it. Come sit and talk to me if you want it straight without a chaser. And it might burn a little when you step on up to taste it. But it's nothing harsh, I promise. Just a little conversation.
Well, everybody, welcome back to the conversation with Harold and Dave. There's Harold and there's Dave, not in that particular order. It is funny.
Left to right to left, whatever.
In the intro, he says the gloves are off and I'm coming out swinging, and that seems to be what Canada and Europe is doing, Dave.
Well, yeah, and interesting little factoid. One of the things that they're doing is they are unsuspending countermeasures they put in place in 2018 to Trump's previous tariffs. So they just said, oh, yeah, here, those things we did, yeah, let's bring them back. And then they're adding on targeting, and they always target things that they think will disproportionately impact red states. So Jack Daniels might become cheaper.
Are we talking about Canada or Europe?
Jack Daniels and Dr. Pepper. That's exactly what's in here, damn it.
Jack Daniels and Dr. Pepper. Well, let's start with, okay, there's a lot to break down here. Dave, when I said we're talking tariffs today, he basically had a wet dream because this is his wheelhouse as long as talking with Ukraine. So we have some questions for him. So I, sitting here playing devil's advocate, was thinking it was a bunch of nothing burgers like the episode we did. And I was like, he's not actually going to enact these tariffs. And now they're not a bunch of nothing burgers now. So now that they're not nothing burgers, now we got to talk about it.
Oh, yeah. Well, and they haven't been nothing burgers because they've caused market turmoil. They've caused uncertainty. And that is something you shouldn't do if you're president. You shouldn't screw with the markets. Okay. And let's keep in mind, I'm not a liberal. I'm a free market kind of guy. I used to hold the door for Milton Friedman, bow my head and go, I'm not worthy. Literally, I'm not making that shit up because I'm a very free market guy, right? We forget about this because Trump has forced me into this apparently left-wing position. And the thing is, they just don't understand. These guys are just crapping on the conservative tradition of being pro-market, of being economically literate. And, so yeah, there's that. Sorry, that's my tirade. Like I say, I'm drinking Jack Daniels, but, and this is what really pisses me off is that the Republican Party, there was a video going around on TikTok with Ronald Reagan talking about why you don't use tariffs. And he gave a lecture, and I'm about to teach a class in international political economy. I'm going to use that video because I don't have a single note. It's a point of view, it's a perspective, but he lays out the theoretical perspective on why tariffs are bad, protectionism hurts the economy, that an academic like I would give that lecture. No notes. Reagan, right? We don't necessarily think of him as this intellectual giant, but he gave the speech and it was perfect. And I'm just like, what the hell happened to the right?
I think I saw that same video, and I think if I'm not mistaken, he started out by saying, in the short term, they may be okay. However, if done at length or for the long term, they can be detrimental or destructive. And, But as far as Milton Friedman, I don't like him because of his approach on school vouchers, and he was the one that started all this stuff. And now, public education is being attacked on steroids. But not to get off base, when it came to this whole talk about steroids, tariffs,
Hey, man, they are tariffs on steroids right now, so maybe that's the
tariffs
new
on steroids. Okay.
one.
Um, But no, when it came to this whole talk, even during the election cycle of tariffs, in the back of my mind, I'm wondering, well, what's to stop other nations from reciprocating those same things against us or our products? Now, I think Canada took it to a whole nother level. They just said, listen, we're going to impose tariffs and we taking y'all stuff off the shelf. We can't even buy American goods in Canada,
Well,
for those Canadian residents.
shelves when it was first threatened, and I mentioned it hurt Kentucky because Canada is either number one or number two in the importing of Kentucky whiskey. So, I mean that's a big thing, and I think the thing with the tariffs, Dave, is tariffs have been a thing that's been used in the past, but it was never used as a threat. Like it's being used violently as a threat, and people don't like to be threatened.
Well, it hasn't, and there's just so much to unpack here. One,
Mhm.
you're tariffing. The original threats are against the two nations that we have been building an integrated economic system with. We developed, in the 90s there was NAFTA. We passed NAFTA, and now NAFTA absolutely was overpromised, right? Al Gore, when he went out to push NAFTA, to sell NAFTA, there were rosy predictions that were not supported by the data. But NAFTA was really about carving out in a global world where we're seeing the rise of a whole bunch of other nations. NAFTA was about creating a zone and basically expanding the U.S. economy by bringing in some players, bringing in Mexico, bringing in Canada, and distributing a lot of our production over these people so that we have an integrated economic system that's bigger than just the United States because the globe is bigger, right? And so a lot of what NAFTA did not save the textile industry in the South. That industry was going to go, but because of NAFTA, a lot of the textile factories went to Mexico instead of Thailand or Vietnam, and they continued to buy, the machinery. They continued to be a customer for yarn. They took a lot of inputs from the United States, and so we still participate in that growth, and that's what NAFTA. I mean, just that all over the place, right? We see that happening. We had this plan to integrate these two economies to build on the North American continent a trading bloc that would compete against Europe, against China, against all these other places. And now somebody who doesn't understand what the hell is going on is attacking the people who are on our side, who are kind of allies and cooperative partners in international trade with us. And so aluminum tariffs, 25% on aluminum. When
Mm.
when when Bush put steel tariffs on, he did not put steel tariffs on Canada and Mexico, right? But here we have, we're going to put it on Canada and Mexico now. And guess what? The Alcoa, the Aluminum Company of America, right? Our major, biggest aluminum manufacturer, guess where they get their aluminum from? Canada. And they are reporting that they are going to have to lay off 100,000 American workers because of these tariffs. And so this is just stupid. This is just in utter ignorance of the reality that Canada and Mexico and the United States have integrated because we are in a global world that is big, and even we aren't big enough, and we need to join with them. So, just it's just fly your plane, Harold. I'm verklempt.
Well, I found it interesting that, and I think I saw a recent video where initially the uh, current president railed against the agreements we have with Mexico and Canada when he railed against NAFTA and then renegotiated these agreements, and now he's complaining about the agreements that he renegotiated. And so I'm kind of twisted here in the fact that, okay, is that cognitive decline that's talking here? Is that ignorance? Is that early onsight of some? I mean, now this whole thing that we had going on with Biden, during his term, I'm starting to see and think now of the current president. Not only that, but when we look at the fact that uh, not just the agreement. Oh God, I lost my train of thought. I hate that. Um, I guess I got to land until my train of thought comes back, and I'll jump back to it.
He's refueling, Dave. Take over.
He's refilling. So while he regathers, I'll just point out. I saw a very interesting video from CBC, whoever the hell they are on TikTok, but they had a very good. They were looking at, does Trump have a plan or not? And the no plan side of it is just, this is stupid. They've got no idea what they're doing. It's on again, off again. The argument for there being a plan to what Trump is doing, because he's, they're talking about all the reverses and the nothing burgers we were talking about before. One argument was that Trump thinks in terms of defeating opponents, right? That Trump sees the world in terms of opponents, and like, what opponents does he see here? Who is the enemy? Because let's face it, MAGA is about identifying dangerous others, whether they be transgender athletes, whether they be woke school teachers, corrupt and slovenly government employees. It's always somebody bad and evil that if we just get rid of them, we'll be better. And so who would the bad guys be in this case? And this report argued that it was global companies, the globalist companies, that all of this market disruption, all of this stuff, if you were trying to uh, limit those guys and disrupt them, that would be that was their best idea of what a plan would be. And like I say, that would explain what they're doing, but it doesn't explain why you've taken, other than the fact that people like Bannon and have this argument against anything that's globalist. And so Trump might be, according to that theory, attacking the companies that do business overseas, which is fucking stupid, because the businesses that do business globally are the better ones, right? Classic case in point, Goodyear versus Firestone. Firestone mainly makes tires and has traditionally made tires for the US market, primarily Ford. And they never really grew very big. Goodyear, on the other hand, became a global competitor, was producing in every country around the world, and is a much bigger, more profitable company. But Trump seems to like Firestones, right? Which is really picking the second string, right? He really wants a JV manufacturing sector, not the front line, which means front line is you have a BMW plant that makes SUVs. They make one car and they produce it for the entire globe, and they export it to every market, because that's the way global production works. That's what's efficient. But no, right? You can't do that. In Trump's world, you got to make things in America for America. You basically have to adopt the import substitution policies of Latin America in the 1960s and 1970s, not Plan A. Fly your plane, Harold. I got to stop. I got to stop myself.
I got you. I got you. No, but again, looking at all of this, and just wondering, okay, where is this coming from, and what is the end goal? Because you can't tell me, increasing unemployment, destroying our economy, the stock market crashing, were the goals, because that was not a part of the quote unquote campaign strategy that we were aware of. That was not one of the promises that he made, that he was going to flip America upside down. No, as a matter of fact, he told us if we vote in the young lady, then her policies would do what his policies are currently doing.
Isn't
And
she our
turning.
age?
Say again,
Isn't she our age?
young lady.
She's older
Um,
than
she might be a few
She
years
looks a
older
lot
than
better
I.
than me, I grant you. I mean, she looks younger than me. I will grant you, because I'm like this. But aren't you younger than me yourself?
I,
Aren't I
I
the young
may, I may be, I may be. I know she's a
Anyway,
couple of
I'm
years
sorry.
older than I am.
I didn't mean to alert on that. I'm sorry.
No,
But
but I think we've had that before where you lumped Harold in with your age, and I think you guys are maybe 7 years apart or so, 7 or 8, almost a
I was
decade.
born the day Kennedy was shot, so I am 61 now.
Oh, so it was your fault. Okay, got it.
I have an
Wow,
alibi. Me and my mother
wow,
are clear. People frickin' know where we
an
were.
alibi. Yeah, well,
I don't
I'm
have my
3 years
father.
younger.
My mother.
Yeah, well, I'm 3 years younger, Dave. So I'm good. 66, baby. But but no, again, when we step back and look at all of this, it's trying to figure out the end goal. How is it that we're continuing now with these attacks on our allies and the relationships that we have with our allies? But then when he even mentioned sanctioning Russia and or Putin, there was an immediate attack on Ukraine that same day when those were announced. And next thing you know, you heard nothing more about the possibility of sanctions on Russia. So again, I'm just trying to really figure out and understand where is he going and what does he stand to gain at the end of it? Because he's not looking like the strong man when you got a 5 or 6 year old telling you to shut up, and doing whatever his thing was.
Have you
Uh,
seen the marshmallow videos of that? You gotta see the marshmallow videos of that.
I'm scared. Uh,
Oh, you really no. You would be. It's actually good for the soul.
so, but again, looking at all of that, and again, trying to just figure out what is the end goal at the end of the day. What is the end goal? Because I'm seeing destruction down the road in the very immediate future, but he's not turning back. And even now, with all the protests and DEI, blackout dates and all this other stuff that's going on with these corporations, you know, that's all a part of what's going on with his attacks, not just on other countries or our allies, but also on the American people, and with the culture wars that are starting to resurface and things that are going on. So the fact that he said he was going to bring in the best and the brightest, I think that's where I wanted to go earlier. He claimed that he was, as always, that he was going to bring in the best and the brightest. That either he's listening to them or they don't even know what they're doing. And we already know that they're not the best and the brightest. However, that's his claim. That's what he said. That's what he promised. But when you have a wrestling company CEO running the Department of Education, and even today, they just fired, 1,400 of their staff, about 50% of their staff. The goal is to get the numbers down so I can pass this tax break. That's really what I think the end goal is. They're going to fire enough people to say, hey, listen, we're going to give you this tax break and it's not going to cost us anything. And we're going to have a zero net result. You know, But at the end of the day, we are seeing all of these other factors. Like I said, the unemployment rate's going to skyrocket if we're not careful. Well, we're not careful, so it's going to skyrocket. And then we don't know the economic impact of those firings, because if these people can't go back to work and they have a mortgage or they have rent and these other things that are due, now you're going to have a whole lot of homeless families. You're going to have a whole lot of other situations that are going on that are going to be detrimental to our economy and then us as a nation as a whole. So I'm going to land my plane right there.
Yeah,
Who? Oh,
and
go
I
ahead.
think
Go ahead.
they aren't going to make it, right? They aren't going to. I think you're actually giving them too much credit. They aren't going to make their tax cut goals. The people they're firing, the savings they're generating are pittances. They aren't
I
going to
agree.
make their tax cut goals. I think you're right about what they think they're going to do, because they think that there's so much waste that they can cut through this stuff. And they're committed to this notion that these federal workers are shit, that they work off of if not lies, ignorant misinformation. The idea that 6% of federal employees don't work Monday through Friday, right? A MAGA person hears that and it confirms their belief that government employees are all, it's a scam and that they're
Lazy.
wasting all their money. A normal person hears that and says, well, that can't be right. And then you look at it and you find out that that statistic that has been mentioned, has been touted right around, is from an unscientific survey where only 6% of respondents to the survey said they worked. And even the people that published the survey said, hey, this isn't a sample. This is just people that phoned in, right?
Also, it's
Because
silly
how
because you're
could 6% of the government only not work Monday through Friday? Are you forgetting the effing military? Are you forgetting the nurses and doctors in VA hospitals? I mean, just if you add up what employees are, it is virtually impossible that this could be the number. But the MAGA folks, it confirms, they throw out a statistic that confirms their predisposition, the thoughts that they're predisposed to, they believe it. Transgender mice is got to be the ultimate thing, right? You believe that there are transgender mice, right? Not transgenic mice. You believe that in Minot, North Dakota, we are creating, the government was paying for a learning center that would study magic, not
Mm.
that they were not saying, well, wait a minute, what's going on with that? Oh, Minot, North Dakota is known as the Magic City, and there was a Magic City Science and Discovery Center, which was going to teach kids STEM, which we
Mm.
like, right? That's good. That's the opposite of magic. It's science, technology, engineering, you know, and but you just pick up on the word magic and you let it confirm your predisposed idea that it's all waste and abuse and nonsense. And those are the people that we have running the country. And it's bullshit. It's they're just not even wrong, right? With what they're doing. You can't have a disagreement over things because they are so committed to this narrative, right? And all information, is accepted that confirms that, and nothing is allowed to disconfirm it. So, we're just have the worst decision making ever going on right now.
it's not just statistics, it's all also the word war that is used, because if you use certain words, that also gets MAGA people fired up. Well, what do we call Canada? He calls Canada a what do they call them? A
You wanted to call him the
tariff
51st state,
abuser.
but
Tariff abuser. A tariff abuser. So we use
oh
the word
wow.
tariff abuser. And they use these things. And when you said transgender, it reminds me that silly show on Fox, Hannity, right? Harold's favorite person.
Oh yeah.
Uh,
Love him.
Hannity, he had James Carville on. And I always love when James Carville goes on these shows, because Hannity kept talking about transgender. And he's like, what are we talking about? Do we want to talk about the millions of people who are losing Medicaid and Medicare? Or do we want to focus on the 100 transgender athletes in a country with 300 million people? It's because we pick these words to get fear, or as Dave said, you you certify their belief system when you use certain words, or you use certain statistics in a certain way, right?
Right. Well, I mean, there's recently, I think it was Van Jones. He brought up a statistic that was interesting in a recent video where you have more in the state of Texas, more incidents of measles than you do transgender athletes across the country. But yet they want to focus on transgender athletes when measles are killing people, has at least killed one person so far. So it's amazing where their priorities are. The priorities aren't let's deal with the real issue that can impact a lot more people. Your focus is on this culture war that people have seen to really dug themselves, just dug their talons in the ground, or whatever you want to call it, just so that they can elevate that particular issue. That doesn't impact really that many people. But nonetheless, this is where we are as a country. Our priorities have always been a little twisted for whatever reason. Because I guess capitalism is king, and that's what really the focus is. Forget about concerns. Let's focus on capitalism, and let's do what we can to milk this cow as best we can.
Dave, how do you feel about? Oh, wait, you want to respond to that? Now,
No. Carry
how
on.
do you feel about Canada's response?
Oh, Canada. It's really sad. I mean, I see the Canadians banding together. I see them, singing their national. I see Quebecois who are, a little bit agnostic about the whole Canada thing, just belting out, "Oh, Canada," like, no, yeah, we're Canadian, yeah, we're on board. I saw when the U.S. Hockey team that decided to run its effing mouth, right, had a Canadian flag on the floor of their locker room. Like, really, guys? And you're going to be upset that they booed and you're going to walk on their flag, and then they bitch slap you guys. You had that shit coming. But I saw a concert where they said at the moment that everyone on their phone saw that Canada won, and the crowd is like interrupting the performance, and they burst into their national anthem. And I think how heartwarming it is to see this unity, and then to realize we're the bad guys, right? That we're the bad guys in this. So Canada, power to you. I gotta say that they are a small country, and they are, they're going to suffer. And I will point out, Christopher Clark is a economist who does a lot of videos online, and he talked about the Smoot-Hawley tariffs, and he was kind of fun because he had the Ferris Bueller guy, uh,
It's fine.
doing. He had the Smoot-Hawley tariff, or the Hawley-Smoot tariff, was part of his thing. He'd say, anyone, that guy, Ben Stein. Um, who is himself a Republican who will agree with everything I'm about to say, I'm pretty sure. But the point is that Tariff Act in the 30s, it didn't necessarily cause our Great Depression, but Canada, like, they really think that the destruction of trade that came from the U.S. imposing the Hawley-Smoot tariffs and suddenly cutting off the trade, and then the retaliations and everything, they're really sure that there's a lot of evidence that says, yes, that was the contagion. That is what sent the Great Depression to Canada, sent it around the world to Europe. And, oh, by the way, what is one of the biggest causes of World War II and the rise of Nazism?
Mm,
The global Great Depression. There's an old
mm.
saying, if goods don't cross borders, armies will.
Oh,
So Canada is fighting the good fight, right? They were dragged down by us once. They are trying to fight a wrong-headed policy, a policy that is in violation of agreements made with them in good faith over years. And so I don't see how they aren't the good guys in this. And I'm sorry if the blowback is on the US, but I can't see that they aren't doing exactly what they have a right and a need to do.
100% behind. I mean, I find it interesting that, well, one real quick, one thing about the tariffs that happened during the time of the Depression, and it's, you can correct me if I'm wrong, Dave, but my understanding is they deepened the impact of the Depression and made it much worse than what it potentially could have been, when tariffs.
To the point of causing it in certain countries. They didn't cause it in the United States, but it
But
was,
it did
how do you
deepen it.
think it became a world depression, right? We had a
Well,
stock market crash here, and,
you just said if goods don't cross borders, armies will. I mean, that's been since the beginning. What of most wars, if we take religious fighting out of it, most wars have been a country trying to get more resources.
Or property.
right? Well, the property comes to the resources. There's a reason why the United States and Europe and France and Germany split Africa all up into little pieces, or India or places like that. Resources. So we're back in the cycle.
The
Sickening.
global and the modern global system
Hmm.
brought us away from that, right? Once
Correct.
now
Yeah.
that statement about armies crossing goes back to a 19th century. What you're talking about is colonialism.
Hmm.
Back in the day, you had these stovepipes, right? You took over colonies to secure natural resources.
Well, I'm talking about even before then. I mean, just since you go back to any period of time, that was the reason for invasions.
Right. Well, when you had agricultural things, but
Right.
uh, I'm just taking the difference between pre World War One and today, right? And even World War Two, because there was still a lot of colonial possessions, right? Japan was seeking to expand their colonial possessions, right? That's what they attacked Pearl Harbor, but that was to cover their southern operation, which was about going down and basically taking over Indonesia to gain access to crude oil, right? And that, by the way, that's what they were doing. It was called the Southern Operation. Their big problem is that the route to Indonesia went between Singapore and the Philippines, which meant you had to go to war with the United States. And great. But the point is, the old colonial system had these stovepipes, right? Nations took over possessions, right? So Java, Indonesia was the Dutch East Indies, and the predecessor of Shell Oil Company was a government owned entity that got the oil. The modern world, we have done away with that, and we have a market system where you don't own resources, you don't have access, the whole system is free, and you have this free access to things if you pay for it, right? And now that brings its own issues with it, but still, we're in a world where uh, we we can gain access to resources by trading. And this idea of going back away from open trading, from a global market for resources, in which if you need more resources, you buy them, you don't invade them, right? Japan needed oil because they attacked us in World War II because they needed oil. They needed to go to Indonesia to get oil because we cut them off from oil because we were one of the few countries that was globally trading oil at that point. And so they were cut off, and not to apologize for Japan in any way, but that was the thing. We stopped trading oil, so armies had to go across borders. Today, we don't have that situation. And the reason I bring it up is this is what the modern global system has going for it, right? For all the complaints you might have about it, this is what it's got going for it. And this is what he's attacking, right? The G word is evil to him. And he doesn't realize that this system is what makes wars like, there's a reason that Russia's invasion of Ukraine is so freaking weird, right? Because we just haven't needed to conquer things to get access to resources. You trade for them. And, so he's starting off a trend that could end back in more wars, more violence. Now that's a couple steps down the road, right? Before that, we just have general economic malaise and that sort of thing. But this is what you're screwing with.
Hmm.
All right, that's
Well,
a lot to drop on you.
yeah.
Well,
True.
it's,
I went
it's,
there.
it's because since we're not a news station, normally you just say things in bits and pieces and hit key marks and move on. But we're always breaking down things here, so it's a lot to intake when you're watching these type of shows because you try to process all that information. People don't want to hear the steps on how something happens or the root of why something happens. They just want to get to the talking points of why it happens and then blame it on somebody, Democrat or Republican. We don't want to get in the weeds and figure out what happens. Um,
True. And then
you're,
on the other side of that, people are somewhat dismissive. You can show them where the errors of the ways, and they are dismissive of now. that's not true, or even though there's clear evidence of the impact, negative impact, they're still dismissive. Like even before the inauguration, there was an attempt to take advantage of the economy at that time. And now, post inauguration, and these new policies and tariffs being implemented, what's happening? The market is tanking, and now they're trying to blame it on the previous president. So, I mean, it's almost like we want it both ways, and we can't. There's only there's two sides to every coin. Either it's going to come up heads or tails. So you got to stay on in his lane and earn or own, excuse me, what it is that's impacting his presidency, his economy, and his people.
And when it comes to that, when I had to debate Cello, right, over Trump, and we had this discussion, and a lot of the complaints were about Biden and how inflation was his fault. And I tried to make this argument that, well, no, the economy of the United States is driven by a lot of factors, that the president is generally a minor role in that, right? And I said that normally, a lot of people will try to blame Republicans because Republicans have a tradition of leaving on reset. Keone's pointing out,
Recessions. Come on,
right?
say it, Dave. Recession.
Recession,
Reset.
depression.
Okay.
Yeah, recessions. I'm sorry.
Anxiety
Yeah,
and
I'm not afraid
everything.
to say it. No, yeah, because those are recessions are objective things. And
So funny.
the thing is, I always said, look, I tried to make the point to Cello that, hey, if you blame the president, Republicans would get blamed more than Democrats. And so, I'm going to say that you shouldn't maybe do that. Right. And he just said, well, you've taken 5 minutes to talk about it. He rejected it, didn't even want to engage with it. The thing is, the corollary to this is, no, the growth of the economy is usually about the economy. Usually. However, presidents can F it up, right? Governments, I just from studying this over time, governments have the ability to screw economies up. They have a one-sided ability. There's much more downside than upside, right? And this was the Reagan argument, right? This is where you would go with deregulation and a lot of other things, right? Now, you may not like Reagan, all that stuff, but
Well, that
like
argument that you said makes a good point because athletes will say this all the time. Coaches are needed, but even coaches have said this. Coaches lose more games than win in sports because who you have, the talent you have, is more that determines mostly if you're going to win the game. And coaches have lost more games than they have won as a factor. So that kind of analogy, the leadership, when you're in a leadership role, you can cause more harm than good, sometimes by being in the way.
Yeah, and I think we could and in fact, increasingly the analysis, and there's a growing, a lot of people are looking at it and saying these economic woes are absolutely Trump's fault. He is absolutely creating, call it unforced errors, own goals, and there's a disproportionate ability to screw things up. And there's no argument. Dan Dresner said, look, Trump said there'll be short-term pain for long-term gain. And Dresner's like, looking at what he's doing, it's short-term pain for long-term malaise, because he is not putting in a policy that will, in the end, produce any great result. And I look at these steel tariffs. How do you think this helps us? You have just taken, steel, major industrial input, right? There are a lot, sure, you might be helping the steel industry, although apparently, as I've said, the aluminum industry, you're shooting them in the foot because they're integrated with Canada. But steel, we make shit with steel that we try to sell to people. So every product that uses steel or aluminum is now going to have a 25% increase in cost, because a tariff is a tax. This is just what's so amazing. The anti-tax group wants to say, oh, tariffs are great. No, it's a tax. It raises prices. They're trying to say it's going to lower prices. And I'm like, no, it doesn't lower prices. Now, countervailing duties might lower the price of Jack Daniels to the point that Jack Daniels is already laying off workers and is in, dire straits, right? So who knows what'll happen there. But when how do you think you lower prices by adding a cost? It defies logic. Also, every company that uses steel in America is now got a 25% disadvantage to all the other countries around the world. How does that encourage companies to come into the US? Right? I mean, you want manufacturing to come back to the US, and then you just made steel and aluminum 25% more expensive. Explain that. You can't, right? Because they need to come back here. And again, how do you think these companies are going to sell? If you make it in America with 25% more expensive steel, how are you going to sell it on a global market when, your competitors have cheaper steel, right? Well, you aren't, right? So maybe we're going to put tariffs on other things, because tariffs, we need more tariffs. We're going to play whack-a-mole. Is we create another side effect, another problem. We're going to whack at that, and what are we going to do? We're going to whack it with more tariffs, right? This is exactly what happened in Latin America, right? And now you put tariffs on these imports of manufactured goods so that the U.S. market, those goods now go up in price so that you can make cars and whatever uses steel and aluminum, you can make it with expensive steel and aluminum and compete against European products, right? So now you have companies in the US making goods that can only be competitively sold in the US. Now the US is a big market. It's not the global market. Firestone. You've chosen Firestone over Goodyear, right? And this is what and it is consistent with his hatred of all things global, but this is a recipe for malaise. And that's why I think Dan Dresner said it really well. It's short-term pain for long-term malaise. Welcome to the party.
It's almost like you need to just close with make it make sense. Um, what's interesting to me is, prior to this administration coming in and really, really putting a sledgehammer, or I guess you could say the saw to everything, I would often have conversations about economic lag, meaning, the economy of the previous administration flows into the next administration until certain policies are passed. I mean, less than 30 days, you got all these flaming policies that are detrimental or dangerous that are being put in place, and then the tariffs on top of them. And now we're starting to see the impact of it. So now you just destroyed the whole notion of, well, not destroy the whole notion, because again, the economy did what it was supposed to do until those policies or new policies begin to take effect. And so now what used to be, say, at least 12 to 18 months, it's now been accelerated. And I think I read somewhere where this decline, this rapid decline in our economy, is now the fastest it's ever happened. You're talking about what? January 20th to now, less than 2 months, and you're already at a point of things on rapid decline, when the next time it's happened this fast, or not this fast, but happened at an accelerated rate, was 2009, when Obama went in office,
Well,
and all the things that happened then.
that's not true.
But
Everything
no,
that's
it's
terrible.
not that Obama caused it.
No,
It's
no, no,
not saying Obama caused it. None of his policies.
I'm not talking
But
about that. Everything you said is not true.
what's
Uh,
that?
the reason why things are happening now is because this administration has to do this. We have to get in the mess to clean up what happened over the last 4 years. I love the silence because that's what I'm always being told. And I say, well, what are they cleaning up? Well, the immigration and the economy. Okay.
Right.
What are they cleaning up about it? Well, the immigration was a mess and the economy was a mess. Well, what was the mess about it? And I get the
I
silence.
hear you.
Yeah.
I
And,
hear you.
well, it
You
was
usually
just
get
utter
okay.
lack.
It's you usually get 2 year. You usually get your first year at least as president to continuously blame the last regime on the failings in that first year. But as you said, record pace. This is a record pace that within 30 days you can't blame the last regime anymore.
That's what I'm saying.
Right.
You used to be able to talk about economic lag, but now this
Yeah.
defies all logic in that regard.
And, because we have never seen a regime come in as a regime, one is usually an administration that
Mhm.
is still working with other people. This is a regime that is taking a very authoritarian approach and they are admittedly being disruptors. They are violating the norms. They are going around, and Trump has, he's got in Elon Musk, he has a sledgehammer, uh, a loose cannon,
Chainsaw.
going out and doing shit. He also, in his own administration, it seems to me, unlike previous administrations, he has sycophants. He has true believers who take something that he says and tries to make it reality. We are really talking 51st state with Canada. I mean, the people around him have glommed onto that, and he probably meant it as a joke, right? I don't think he went in to say Canada should be the 51st state. I think he was actually talking with Trudeau, said something off the cuff, but now he has these acolytes who are going to bring it in. And so now they are increasingly solidified on this notion that Canada would be the 51st state, which is, again, insane, right? One, how do you do this, right? But
Canadians
even if
don't
you
anymore.
did it, those people are going to vote against you.
They
We're a
want no. They
democracy.
want
You
no.
bring Canada in, there will never be another Republican president,
They,
right?
Never.
oh,
What?
so wait, we should want this to happen. No, but this
Well,
he has convinced.
And then we'd never have a Republican controlled Senate either.
He has convinced a large portion of this population that the strongest country in the entire world has been weak.
Because he hasn't been president. That's why he's saying. Only he can make it strong.
The strongest country in the entire world has been convinced that they've been weak this whole time. Certain people in the population.
uh,
Well, I wasn't looking for a
well,
disagreement. I just, yeah.
this was always my problem with this was always my problem with Make America Great Again, because I'm like, we are great. What do you know, I feel like we are consistently great, and I feel we are getting better, right, all the time. I'm a big fan of the United States, of the system. It's not perfect, but it keeps getting better. And I think that, the legalization of gay marriage made us better, right? And in fact, in a lot of ways,
Not as much as the legalization of marijuana in most states, but I'll give
there
you.
you go. There's another thing. Let's go
There
with
you
that.
go. Let's
Right?
go.
That we've been seeking a better, this movement forward. And the thing about that is that I've said, so if you're saying we aren't great now, why do you hate America? Was always my thing. It's like, why do you hate America? Of course we're great. We don't need to be made great again. By the way, the Trump administration has this definition of patriotic education that, wants to say that, one of the tenets of patriotic education is that the U.S. has consistently moved towards its fundamental values and gotten better. And I'm like, okay, which means that if we roll the clock back, we were worse. So what, I said, are you promoting revisionism? I don't think you guys thought this through. The point though is that I think that was always my problem with it is I really feel manufacturing didn't lead the United States. We are still a major manufacturing power. We just don't employ. Manufacturing employment went from 18 million to like 10, 11. I don't know what it is now, but we had this collapse of employment because guess what? When you make shit, you use like 2 guys instead of 50. Right? I mean, come on. Have you seen robots? Have you seen how manufacturing facilities work? Right? We don't have people attaching things to cars and doing rivets and welding. We have machines to do that. That was in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Willy Wonka had that right. Right? So a children's movie understands the modern economy better than the Trump administration. I'm landing that plane,
you
Harold.
you say that when you hear "Make America Great Again," you always say, "Well, we've always been great." And my response to "Make America Great Again" has always been, "Well, for who?" Because if you're talking about, and most of them will cite a time period in reference to that response, and I'm like, "Well, who are you referring to in that time period?" You know, I was watching Forensic Files the other day, and it was funny because it was a crime back in the 50s, and they said a simpler time, which I got, and it said a time of innocence. I laughed.
Mm,
What do you mean a time of innocence? Did you know what was happening in the 50s?
mm,
A time of rampant misogyny and racism. That's a time of innocence. So I was laughing. I'm like, "Make America Great Again." If you're talking about a time period, what time period and for who are we referring to? I like the way it is now much better than I like it how it was in the 90s when I was a teenager or the 2000s. I remember certain things that were happening in the 90s, epidemics that were happening in the 90s in my neighborhood and other neighborhoods. So, nostalgia, or what do they call it? Looking back through rose colored lenses. Is that the phrase?
Yeah.
Or,
Well, and nostalgia, it's always better. By the way, I just did some calculations,
uh-oh.
right?
Is that
If
what
you
you were over
added
there doing?
Canada,
that's
I saw
dangerous.
an abacus in your hand, and I didn't know what
yeah,
was
That's
I
dangerous.
was clicking on it. I just had to do the calculation of if you
happening.
had Canada as the 51st state, how many members of Congress would they have? They would have 46. They would have 46 members of Congress.
Hmm.
Right now, and do you think those guys are gonna be Republicans? You know, probably not. They're probably going to be their own thing, and they're going to probably try to vote as a bloc.
Hey,
And remember, there would be 46 less U.S. representatives, right? So my thing is like
hey,
right now,
if you try to get Canada as a 51st state, you think Quebec's coming along with that? Canada has a hard enough time trying to get Quebec to play ball.
yeah, I just say that even if you succeed at this, you have now going to bring in a voting bloc. It'll be equivalent to another California,
Mhm.
right? And there's 40 million people in Canada, and you've got to give them votes. Even if, I keep saying it wouldn't be the 51st state, it might be the 51st through 60th, right? Because there are multiple provinces in Canada.
Yeah.
But the thing about it is that you would totally, so it's just this idea. The long term plan doesn't exist, right? They haven't thought this through. They haven't, not only have they not thought how they might achieve this goal, they haven't realized that achieving the goal of making Canada the 51st state would take them out of power.
Through which one of his presidencies have you seen a long term goal? Remember, this is also the guy who complained and yelled and screamed and said the deals that were signed with Mexico, the trade agreements with Mexico and Canada, were terrible. They weren't thought out. They weren't going to last. They're the worst deals in history, forgetting that he's the one that signed them.
Well, he made a new one. Yeah, he said NAFTA was the worst thing, so he made a new one, said it was great, and now he's there thinking, yeah.
Because he doesn't remember he did it. He thinks Biden did it.
The problem is you have to lay these things out unless you're going to get accused of having Trump derangement syndrome,
Mm,
right? You know, and you know, and even though you lay them out, and these folks who are, they don't want to think, they want to feel, they want to feel that there are these bad people in the world and that they're defending the good people who look like them, right, and
mm.
think like them from these bad people, right? That's the essence of the culture wars. But I think you have to lay out the logic to them now and again, and it won't do any good, but it'll get them onto another tack. Maybe, I don't know.
Well, I don't know. That sounds like the actual name of the policies. I don't know. I don't know policy. Um, Guys, it was a good show. Uh, One day we'll have something else to talk about than this regime. It's good information, but it's also taxing, tiring.
Oh my God. Every
Well,
day.
you read certain things, and you just want to take a hammer and hit yourself in the head. And then when you're talking to certain people and you hear the logic that they're using, and you're giving them factual evidence, and they don't want to hear it, it's like it's just what's that saying? Beating your head against a wall. Uh,
I just retreat to my main photography and like, loons, my friends, the common loon there, and the art, I mean, at a certain level, you've got to get out of that space
well,
because doom scrolling doesn't help.
Well, we all have our coping mechanisms. You have painting, Harold has Jesus, and I have drugs. Goodbye, everybody.
Wow.